Welcome to Beyond Vows and Veils, your luxury wedding experience. Our podcast, I feel, is a treasure trove of inspiration and insight for newly engaged couples. Join us as we have captivating stories, expert insight, and real wedding experiences that you can listen and learn from. Beyond Vows and Veils listeners, meet Jennifer Sharpe, a seasoned hospitality professional with over 30 years of experience in the industry. As a senior catering sales manager for the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin and Swan Reserve, Jennifer brings a wealth of expertise to the table, specializing in wedding and event planning. With a background that includes prestigious roles at renowned properties such as the Ritz-Carlton, JW, and Sheraton, Jennifer's journey culminates in her current position overseeing weddings and social events at the heart of Walt Disney World Resort. Her recent venture with the Walt Disney World Swan Reserve, an intimate oasis in the heart of Walt Disney World, has added another dimension to her impressive career, offering unparalleled event spaces and breathtaking views of the resort. Jennifer's extensive knowledge extends beyond venue aesthetics. She is also well-versed in the intricacies of contracting and servicing hotel venues. Her track record of successful events and her ability to exceed client and vendor expectations speak volumes about her dedication and professionalism. As a certified wedding planner and a member of the National Association of Catering and Events, Jennifer is committed to sharing her expertise to guide couples on their journey to finding the perfect wedding venue. In our conversation, we dive into topics such as navigating the contracting process, understanding venue expectations, and uncovering insider tips to ensure a seamless planning experience. Join us as Jennifer shares her insights, invaluable advice, and behind-the-scenes knowledge to empower couples in their quest for the ideal wedding venue. Get ready to embark on a journey filled with practical wisdom, budget-saving strategies, and peace of mind you need for your special day. Hi everyone, welcome back to Beyond Vows and Veils. I am super excited to be having Jennifer Sharpe, who is literally so experienced when it comes to all things venues and properties. And so we're going to dive in. Obviously, this is a really good episode for anyone that's newly engaged and is looking to kind of find the ideal property. It's also going to be really supportive in navigating how to find the right property, things to think about when contracting the property, and then obviously we'll hear from Jennifer just from a venue perspective, some things that couples and families should be taking into consideration. So welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we dive in, Jennifer, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your background with where you currently are today. I know that you have so much experience in terms of the market, but would love to kind of hear where you're at now.
Yes, well, thank you. I actually started my career over 20 years ago and have spent some time at the Swan and Dolphin. And then I was at the Ritz-Carlton and JW Marriott Orlando Great Lakes, and then went to Disney Fairy Tale Weddings as a planner there, and now back to the Swan and Dolphin for our brand new property that just opened, which is called the Swan Reserve. So lots of years of selling, servicing local social events, specifically weddings, and have just used all that knowledge base to assist couples throughout the year, probably over thousands of couples over the years. So Happy to be here so I can share some of that knowledge and tips and tricks for when you're finding a venue and contracting to work with a hotel and catering manager.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating that you do have also planning background. Not everyone in the venue world does have that. So when you're thinking about when a couple comes to a property, you're looking at it from obviously a lot more angles than someone that would probably just have experience from a particular venue standpoint. You're thinking about where a vendor's loading in and how much time are they going to need for setup. And that's so important to have a partner like that when you're hosting functions.
Absolutely. That is so important. So important.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to start from the top because obviously a lot of couples that are listening to our podcast are very new in their planning journey. And so they're sort of at that stage where they have the daunting task of finding where they're going to host their celebration. And, obviously our team specializes more in cultural events, so we're going to kind of nod into that a little bit more for this episode. But Jennifer, is there anything in particular, like when couples are at the very beginning stages and they're looking for the ideal property, what are some things that you feel like are good things to keep in mind for that process for them?
Well, I think most importantly, which makes it very easy for a wedding couple, is the ease of their guests getting to and from all the different events. So for me, having everybody in one place with an ease of being able to go from function to function is I going to take the less worry and stress off of the wedding couple. Having to transport guests on motor coaches or have them going from place to place on different parts of town can be very challenging, especially when you are in a city or a location that has lots of traffic or interstates that can get bogged down, that it could potentially, keep your guests from getting from destination A to B. So I think having it in some sort of location where everything is right there, sleeping rooms, your meeting space, everything you could possibly need for the whole entire wedding weekend. To me, that sets the stage for a successful event, to have everybody in one home base. The next thing that I think is important is to make sure the space fits the size of event that you're having. Like, how big of a space do you need? What are you bringing in? A band versus a DJ? How many guests are going to be attending? If it's plated, seated, if you're a big dancing crowd, are you going to need a big dance floor? Just making sure that the space actually fits your function. And then third, which I feel most couples put as their number one, but to me it's a number three, is the decor of the room. Because if you've hired an amazing planner and they've got a great vision, it doesn't really matter what the space looks like. They can transform it into anything that is magical. So to me, functionality of having all your guests in one location and ease of being able to get there, two, making sure it fits the type of events that you're doing, and three, then look at the carpeting, the wall coverings, the chandeliers, and those things, because again, those are important. You don't want an ugly space, but if you have a good planning team, they'll transform it into something that you're, envisioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's actually really good points to have, because when you were mentioning, the first thing is obviously just location and ease for everyone. We work with a lot of couples that, aren't usually from the area. I would say 80% of the couples we work with don't necessarily live in the state of Florida. And so when they're having to travel in, we're thinking about how far is the venue from the airport? How long is it going to take them to get there as well? Because you may fall in love with a property that's sort of remote and very cool and out there, but ultimately Florida and especially our contingency plans, which I harp on a lot on my podcast, is weather calls. And so I'm totally with you. I think, Jennifer, you hit it. It's really about the guest experience, and that guest experience starts when people are booking their flights. Where are they going to be staying? How much is the lodging rates for them? What is the ease of getting to and from your locations? Because we have a love-hate relationship with transportation shuttles to and from locations, because you never know what to expect, and guests definitely don't like to be hustled. They want to be timely, but it's also just kind of cumbersome to get on a shuttle, and we definitely don't recommend anything outside of really a 30-minute radius from your host property, because it can just get really cumbersome for everybody, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And then it's like, what if they forget something and they have to go back, or if somebody's not feeling well? Now they can't get back to their room easily, and they don't have car transportation, and they're not feeling well, or what have you. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as like capacity, what is usually your rule of thumb, Jennifer? Is it based on like square footage, or is it kind of based on like, hey, what is this style event are you doing? Are you doing mix and mingle? Are you doing a plated meal? And then you can kind of give more of a direction and your thoughts on the space is a good fit or not.
Yes, I would say a little mix of both. So you definitely want to make sure that you have the right amount of square footage, for sure. The shape of the room matters. Sometimes a long, narrow, skinny, rectangular room versus a square shaped, or if there's any obstacles like columns in the room, that could take away from, setting up the chairs and tables and having a direct view to the head table or something like that. So a lot of things to take into consideration. And it's not just all about the square footage, because as you know, as event planners, we can pretty much squeeze anything into any tile, any size of space. It's just a matter of being creative with it.
100%. And one of the things that I recommend, I'm not sure if you've done with some of your past couples, sometimes I either will ask the venue coordinator to send like diagrams from previous events they've done with maybe a similar guest size.
Very good idea.
Or even just in general, like maybe ask the venue coordinator to throw a quick little generic floor plan together, because especially for cultural events, we're having, I don't know, whatever the guest count size is, as you mentioned, like the appropriate size dance floor, then you've got your bars and your food. And so, discussing what the family's comfortable with. Are we okay if food's in the foyer? Does food have to be in the main space? Is that a deal breaker for you? Like understanding your expectations to also set up the venue and on-site coordinator up for success to make sure they're selling the right space to you at their property.
Absolutely. I think it's our duty from the venue's standpoint to come to a meeting prepared with a sample diagram and a sample budget. I think that's imperative. When you're having conversations from the very beginning, you want to make sure that the family can afford the, venue, as well as show them the diagram, show them how the space can be set up in those different ways that you just mentioned. I try to either carry raw diagrams with me. They're usually in either, plastic folders that I can show them and pull right out of my attaché case, or I'll carry my iPad with me and I will pull them right up on my iPad and be able to stand in the space and show them. I think we take for granted as a venue is that people can visualize what we see every weekend. Right. We're doing events every single weekend, and we're seeing how these rooms come into shape once the event is taking place. Many times a wedding couple coming out to a space for the first time, they've never even seen a layout of a ballroom or really understand the layout of a ballroom, because when you're attending an event versus hosting an event, it's two different things. So it's important to show them visually, this is how the room would look, this is how the tables can be laid out, these are the different styles, this is your exit, your entrance, this is fire code, where we have to have space for this is where our servers come in and out for that. And I think, again, my years of experience of being a planner, trying to empathize and help the client understand like what's going on behind the scenes from a service perspective, and what's going to make their event successful for the timing of delivering food and ease of being able to get in and serve your guests quickly so that they can get on with the party, so that you're not spending 2 hours for a meal service. If you set it up correctly and you put the layout correctly, it'll help things run smoothly, and then you'll be able to get on with your party. And all those pieces are extremely important, and that comes with knowledge and expertise. So you want to make sure you're working with a venue that is taking all that into consideration when you are touring them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a great note, Jennifer, because for any couple that is setting up site visits at properties, also getting a vibe or kind of a personality feel for if that venue coordinator is coming to the table prepared with that information, because ultimately that does show their level of kind of, commitment to making sure that their venue is a good fit for you. Because the last thing that any of us want to do is sign the contract and start this year-long plus journey together and kind of start it on not such a great standpoint. Oh, by the way, that's not going to fit. Or, oh gosh, the ceiling height is actually too small for your month up plan B, So those are all things to definitely think about. And I think having someone with your level of experience is so vital in the industry. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because I get asked this a lot by couples, is a lot of times they'll go and they'll tour with someone at a property and they fall in love with that individual. And they're like, wait, what do you mean after your contract signed that they sort of get, obviously introduced to someone else that's going to service, maybe just speak to that in terms of some properties will do both sales and service. There'll be this one point of contact, and then sometimes it gets passed off. What's your experience with that, or what do you actually do?
Well, I have a lot of different perspectives on that. I actually currently am selling and servicing my events. So once I do the walkthrough and do the contracting with my couples, I stay with them. And so that is nice. There's a level of comfort and continuity from beginning to end, which is extremely nice. And then also as a couple or a planner, you don't have to keep repeating yourself over and over, like, oh yes, we already talked about it in the planning or the, site phase, and now I have to repeat it again. And obviously what was sold is what would be delivered. Where in some scenarios, when you have a person that's on a sales team and then another group of individuals on the services team, sometimes it can get lost in translation. However, if you have a really great team in place, I know at the Ritz-Carlton, we had it separated for sales and services, and we all worked in the same office. So, I mean, there was really very little that there was not really loss of continuity, because it would go straight from the sales phase, and we would even consult the services managers. Like, we would bring them in and say, gosh, I just did this big site and it's probably going to be 400 to 500 guests. How would you handle this situation, or how would you set this up? And we would get feedback from them and involve them in the work that's going to affect them. They would actually give us pretty good suggestions, and we'd be like, wow, okay, I didn't really actually think about that. And then we would go back into the sales process and say, hey, we can actually flip this room like this, and actually it would work better. And occasionally we would bring things to the table that as a sales manager you may not even think about. And in a hotel property where you don't have an experienced person like myself who's done both sides for so many years, and I've been able to give information from both sides of sales and services. If you have a person who's a salesperson through and through and they've never serviced events before, that can be to the detriment of the couple, because then they're not really telling the truth about what things could be lurking around the corner of some problems. Or vice versa, you get a services person in that doesn't really know what they're doing. So sometimes if you have one person experienced and one person not so experienced, having two different individuals would actually benefit the couple, because one can lean on the other and bring more to the table to converse with each other.
Yeah.
Versus a one-stop shop like myself. So there's kind of pros and cons to both. I don't think it should hold you back from booking any particular venue. I think the more people you have on the team, the better, because you're going to have all those resources. So
yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good perspective, actually, because you're right. It is a team effort at that point, and it can certainly just support you in the greater good of just having conversations and what have you. One of the things that I would love to, chat about is, obviously we talked a little bit about sales and service. So now I have to talk about contracting, which is quite the journey. And I wanted to do this episode primarily because I know, Jennifer, if anyone can walk us through the contracting process of a property, it's definitely you. And I think it's also helpful to shed some light for couples who are looking at venues and ultimately trying to weigh the pros and cons and make decisions. And it can be a daunting experience because it is one of your bigger contracts, obviously, that you are going to sign. And it does sort of set the tone for all the vendors that you're going to be signing and the success of the event and what have you. So I'd love to just talk about, if a couple loves the property, they come to you and they say, okay, Jennifer, we're ready to contract. How do you sort of structure that conversation? Because outside of just the main functions, a lot of couples come to us and go, Friday night party, and we have a wedding in the morning, and we have a lunch, and then maybe a dinner. But there's also a lot of other little things, like a hair makeup room, or does your designer need floral storage, or are you going to need like a hospitality room so that your guests can come in? Like, how do you usually shape your agreements from the start?
Yes, no, it's important, especially in a hotel, to protect your space. So if you do need all these additional rooms, it is important to mention that in the very beginning, even if you don't know the timing of it, even if you don't know if you really are going to use those spaces. And some hotels will charge you for those spaces, because if they're taking the rooms out of inventory and holding them for you, typically there's some kind of rental fee involved. But it's honestly best to negotiate that as a whole. Maybe guarantee some food and drinks in those rooms, and that may lower your minimum rental fees for those spaces. But I would get it in the very beginning and have those conversations in the beginning, because it is very difficult to go back at the very end of the process, a couple months out, and try to get those spaces, because most likely they're going to be booked, because in a hotel you have lots of sales managers selling the space. It's our job to fill the space, every nook and cranny of the hotel. So it would be difficult to go back and try to get them later. Also, it's important, for in your contract to have all your pricing guaranteed by a certain time frame. Whether you can lock in your pricing right at that moment and tell them the prices that you're looking at that moment to be locked in, if they can do that. And if not, at the very minimum, you want to lock in a year out. So if you're booking your venue a year and a half in advance, maybe you say at a year out, whatever the pricing is going to be, I want to lock in. But just make sure there's some kind of clause in the contract that's locking in your pricing at some time frame so that they cannot switch it out on you if they decide to increase menus by 20%. And now you're stuck. All of a sudden you've set your budget, and now all of a sudden you've got this unexpected 20% increase in your budget. And most properties understand that. They understand that weddings are a different animal than a meeting or a convention, and they want to be fair to the wedding couple, and they understand that this is just one piece of their large budget and expense. So I think it's fair that they can lock in at a certain amount. At least in my property, I think that's a fair thing to do. So we do lock in at 1 year in advance. Whatever the pricing is, that's what you lock in. Make sure you have clauses in your contract about the outdoor functions. Will they guarantee you an indoor space? What does that look like? Many times a hotel may not be able to tell you the exact room it's going to be, but they can guarantee the same amount of square footage. Just make sure you have a little bit of conversation about that so that there is a plan B. And if the plan B is inside, think about all your decor pieces, like you mentioned, Brittany, with the Mundok. Can it fit in this indoor backup plan B space? Think about your loaded in as well. Those are good questions to ask. Another important clause, I think, is your rebook or your possible, cancellation rebook, especially in Florida. We have a lot of inclement weather. Occasionally, once in a blue moon, things because of hurricanes and different storms that we have, you want to make sure that that's a nice solid clause in your contract to be able to rebook without penalty, or to have both of you walk away without penalty in case something like that were to happen. So the force majeure, acts of God clause is very important. Having that ability in case there's something that comes up as a family emergency, somebody is ill or has passed away in your family, to be able to say, okay, I have to rebook my event because we're now doing a funeral instead of a wedding. Being able to pick up whatever you've worked on and move it to a new date without penalty, and to take all the money and put it towards it. Those are really important things, in my opinion, to have in your contract. Whenever it has to do with money, and potentially being out of money, it being taken away or penalized, you just want to make sure that you're protecting yourself in those clauses. That's really important. Also, just to make sure you're checking what their paragraphs are about vendors, wedding planners, event planners. See what their policies are. Make sure you can bring in your own. Make sure you're checking how much insurance is required for your vendors. It varies from property to property and hotel company to hotel company. I know some back in the day used to be like, oh, 1 million in coverage, no problem. That was the standard. Well, now there's a lot of places requiring it up to $5 million. So you really have to check and make sure, because all these vendors you have lined up, if they don't have the proper insurance, it could cost that vendor an additional $5,000 to take out this extra insurance policy, and now they may not take you because they can't afford that extra insurance. So that's good conversations to have ahead of time as well. So lots of things, lots of clauses. Usually a contract can be anywhere from 6 to 10 pages long. A lot of the paragraphs in the contract are to protect you and to protect the hotel, but they are written in a way to try, honestly, to protect our wedding couples. I know, at least for me, when I've come to every property I've been at, I've actually taken the sales contract, completely rewritten it to be more user-friendly for wedding couples, because when you're paying out of your own personal checking account or bank account, it is totally different than when it's a company paying out of a corporate checking account. You're putting your heart and soul, every nickel and dime, since you probably have been very young, to save for a wedding, and you want it to go well, and you certainly don't want to lose money. So the hotels typically are pretty friendly in trying to work with wedding couples. Of course, they want to make their money at the bottom line. We want the return on investment and to make money, but we do also want to be somewhat user friendly, because if a hotel is smart, they're going to think about future weddings from that family, or future the family having children, and then those children coming back or vacationing with the hotel, or it builds a customer for life typically if you do a really great job for a wedding. So that is the hope of a hotel, and that could be potentially future revenue for that hotel. So it's important to make sure that the contract is user friendly for both involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Both parties.
Definitely. I mean, Jennifer, there's so much incredible information just in what you shared, because I think these are, for couples that are starting this journey, there's a lot of information there, right? And what Jennifer's sharing is not to overwhelm you. It is just to say that there are a lot of moving parts to the agreement. There are a lot of different things for consideration, and having somebody, whether that be both your planner and the venue coordinator or sales manager, to support you in navigating each of those paragraphs so that you understand. Because I always tell couples, your venue is sort of like, hosting a big party at somebody's house.
Yes.
And at that house, they have house rules, as anybody would, right? I mean, if you're going to come into my house and you're going to host a party, here's some of the things that you should be aware of. And so things like, what time can you arrive and can you start setting up for your party? How much power do I have available that's accessible to you? Or if your caterer's coming in, here's the equipment that I have available for them to use, keeping in mind that they have other functions going on. So I think it's important for any couple out there to understand that, when you're coming into a property, you want to make sure that you know your house rules, because at the end of the day, if you can be mindful of those, or if you have questions or, edits that you want to make, like, those are the times to bring it up, is certainly during contracting. And, if you are planning on working with a planner, certainly I think the time to do that is either when you're searching for a property or when you found a property, to kind of help you navigate some of those conversations, because you just don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, ultimately, you're not planning a wedding every single day. Certainly the venue coordinator has your best interest at heart, because again, they don't want to have you sign the dotted line and then later down the road you're like, oh, well, you didn't mention this to me, or you didn't tell me about that, or you didn't tell me I couldn't pick my plan B space. Like, all of these things, they're looking out for your best interest. But again, like, unless you're literally buying out the entire resort, which is rare, then, there's just some things to take into consideration and keep in mind. But everyone, obviously, that's selling you a space wants you to have the best experience while you're working at that location. So I think that's really important. Everything that you mentioned, Jennifer, is super helpful.
Yes. I mean, you brought up a good point too. If you need extra time to load in and you need a longer setup time, some properties do charge you for that. So it's a good question to ask in the beginning. Is there going to be additional fees to get into that room earlier for setup? Because typically they only block 2 to 3 hours beforehand. So if it's needed of an all day load in or load out, they may charge. So that's a good question to ask. Also, I was just going back to the contract thing. If you're reading a contract and it sounds very one-sided, for the benefit of that particular, venue that you're going to be, contracting with, just be very leery of that. Like, it really should not be a windfall for the hotel only, or for the venue, or whatever location that you're booking. If it doesn't seem very user friendly towards you, to where, it seems like they're going to lock you in every which way possible, really, think thoughtfully about that, because it really shouldn't be, that like kind of take it or leave it type of, contract style. So that's something that an experienced planner can help you navigate through. If it's a place that you just absolutely love and have to have your wedding there because your parents got married there or something, that's one thing, but just be very leery of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really wise to bring up, Jennifer. One of the things that, as planners that I've experienced, especially with South Asian weddings, is we always have to talk about, catering permissions. And I know this is a big conversation, because whenever I work with a new couple, and before we usually even reach out to properties, we have the lovely budget conversation, right? We price everything out on an Excel. Like, what's the bar, what's the expectations for catering, who are you going to hire for decor, what are we thinking for hair and makeup and photography. And we really want to give a very full view of here's kind of what you can expect in terms of budget based on what you shared with me your expectations are. And then obviously that will range based on the tier of property that you decide to go with. And so one of the things I think always floors the couples that I talk to is the catering fees that they have to pay, a fee to allow their own caterer to come in. Can you speak to that from a venue perspective? Because I think it's really helpful for couples to understand like what that fee is really offering to them and why there's a fee for them to bring in their own caterer to the properties.
Absolutely. Well, in a hotel, there's so many moving parts and departments that are layered just beyond the actual like catering function. So we have front of the house and back of the house. So back of the house teams are people like the stewarding, team that washes all the dishes. So they essentially, before every event, look at the event and they process how many glassware, silverware, china. They're pulling those out of inventory. They're polishing them. They're putting them into racks and they're loading them and they're rolling them into wherever you're going to be, having the event. So that team is responsible for getting all the equipment there clean and shiny. They're also responsible for loading it all out of the ballroom at the end of the night dirty and washing it and cleaning it and putting it all back. So that in itself is a big team, the stewarding team, pulling equipment for you. There's also another team called event setup team. That is the team who move all the tables and chairs. So they are responsible for looking at your diagram and loading in all of those big tables, bringing in all the chairs. Occasionally you'll have a rental company that may bring some chairs in, but they're loading things in like tables and buffets and your, anything that you need equipment wise that is a hard surface table or chair. Sometimes linens, they will bring that and set them up in the room. So these guys are lugging all these heavy equipment things in and out, setting up and tearing down. They're also going to flip the room for you. They're going to set your ceremony. They're going to do all of that. They're the grunt work, so to say, of the event. And then you have the culinary team, and the culinary team are the people who are cooking your food, or they're assisting your caterers who are coming in to cook the food. So they're prepping the ovens. They're making sure that the back of the house kitchen areas are clean. They're giving bowls and mixers and chafing dishes and whatever equipment is needed for mise en place in the back in the actual kitchen area. So they're helping to manage all of that. Sometimes the purchasing team has to get involved if things are being shipped or being ordered and being sent into the hotel. A lot of our kosher items and kosher events that we've done in the past, like you have to have these items sent in and they have to be inspected beforehand and such. So they're kind of handling all the logistics of the catering coming in and out of the property. The banquet team is the ones that are actually servicing your event. They're the ones in your nice, tuxedos or black suits and white shirts, and they're the ones that are actually coming in. They do all the side work like in a restaurant. So they're getting all the wine bottles prepared and they're taking out the corks. They're cooling down the wine. They're filling up ice waters. They are setting the tables with the silverware, glassware, and china that the stewarding team left for them to put into the room. They're polishing, they're folding all the napkins, they're the ones servicing your guests, they're pulling plates, they're cleaning up place settings, they are refolding napkins when the guests leave the table, they're helping the catering team refill the buffets, they're pouring coffee and water and service and making sure your guests are happy and fulfilled at their tables while they're eating their meals. And they typically stay till, from setup to, tear down in the event space. You also have the housekeeping team. These are the people that come in, they vacuum the floor, they wipe things down, they're dusting everything, they're making sure the restrooms are clean, and paper towels and toilet paper are stocked throughout the event, and making sure that if anything is, gone awry in a restroom, they're cleaning it up, and they are taking care and making sure that all the public spaces in and around where your event is taking place looks neat and tidy and clean. You've got your valet team who welcome your guests on the front drive, who ensure that your guests' luggage and things are being taken to rooms if you're in a hotel. So there are quite a few hands, not to mention engineers who make sure the air conditioning is on and working, and making sure that water fountains are turned off or turned on at a certain time frame. They're making sure the lights are working properly and there's no burnt out light bulbs, and ensuring that the power is working well in case you need a power drop for a band or a DJ and what have you. So there's a lot of it. It's like a small inner working city, if you think about it. Like in my hotel property, we have over 2,000 cast members working in our properties. That's insane. That is some small city in the middle of somewhere,
Yeah.
And all of these different departments work hand in hand in order to make an event successful. Of course, that's a big hotel property. I know some offsite venues may not have as big of a team, but they're still going to have layers of people that are doing things in different concessions in order to make your event successful. So all of that is taken into consideration when you're just bringing in the catering is just one small little piece of the pie
Right.
of the big picture of what we're trying to paint for you. And so you are taking care of all of those aforementioned cast members and employees that help to make an event successful. I always tell people, I'm just the tip of the iceberg. When you see me orchestrating and typing up the BEOs, I am literally just the tip of the iceberg, because if you were to go under the water and see this massive, massive iceberg underneath of the support system that supports me to make the events successful, your mind would be blown at the hundreds of people that truly do the grunt work and make things successful. So, the catering managers don't get any piece of that. We typically don't get any piece of that service charge. All of it goes to the aforementioned teams that are working hard behind the scenes every day to ensure that the events go smoothly. And that's a very similar structure in most hotels.
Yeah. Honestly, Jennifer, I couldn't have articulated that nearly as well as you did. And I think for any couple listening, if that doesn't give you any indication of what your money is going towards, I don't know what can. But,
Right.
Basically everything that Jennifer's just outlined, when the property presents you, if you are saying, hey, we want to bring in our own caterer, and they say, okay, well, this is the cost per person, in order for you to do that, that's all of those elements Jennifer just described, that's what that fee is going towards. So it's not just for them to turn on the lights and to offer you some servers that day. There's a lot that goes into it. And, Jennifer mentioned the BEO. BEO is otherwise referred to as the banquet event order. And essentially, I refer to that sometimes as the venue's version of your timeline, if you will, but from a cost and a food and beverage perspective. They're going to go through like, okay, such and such room needs to be open, stage needs to be dropped, designers arriving at noon, whatever it might be. But ultimately, that's really just the paperwork that all of those teams need in order for their role to be successful and for them to have the direction that's needed. So if you were like, I want the room to be set to 72 degrees or whatever it is, like if you're going to be very detailed specific, then you can be, but usually don't go that crazy. But ultimately there's so much that goes into it. So I so appreciate you articulating that, Jennifer, because a lot of times, as planners, we try to, and I understand that it's a lot for couples, especially that are bringing in outside catering to digest, because essentially you are having to pay twice in a way, because you're paying the venue a fee, a per person fee, but then you're agreeing to a per person menu cost with your exterior South Asian caterer. So it can definitely add up. And so one of those things that if you're in the beginning stages or you're thinking about your budget, back to what Jennifer said before, it's really important that you give your venue coordinator a very clear overview of what your expectations are for the weekend, so that they can have the space and the staff set aside for you. Because it's not that no one can accommodate you if last minute you decide to host an event. It's just that it can't be guaranteed. Right. And so those are just things to take into consideration when you're booking a property. It's not as easy as just saying, hey, we last minute need a, room for a ceremony that's taking place Friday morning. Well, there might not be any space available.
Right.
And the last thing that venue coordinator wants to do is fluster you or not give you the options, but I think that it just goes both ways, right? Proper communication, back to those house rules, just being really clear about what your expectations are so that they can service and deliver it. So thank you so much for explaining that, Jennifer. And just to be clear, the outside catering fee also has the service charge and the sales tax tacked on to that, which again is all relatable to the same departments that Jennifer has just described.
Yes, absolutely. And that service charge is split up into many, many different teams and many different, employees, cast members. So it's a very important piece. It is a lot of money. In our particular property, it's 26%, which is quite a bit in your overall wedding budget. But if you truly think about all the people that are involved in setting up and making sure your event is a success, it's well worth it. And if you just look at it at the bottom line of what the price is divided by the number of people that you have, and not really look at it as a line item, you'll see the overall value. Once you have your actual event.
Definitely. So just to clarify, because I've gotten this question a lot, it is not a tip to your venue coordinator. It's literally the ability to staff your event properly and for all of the different departments to make sure that they are up and running for the event. So, it's not something that's like a negotiable item. And again, some properties may charge you a seat fee of, I don't know, $60 per person for a luncheon. And some people may charge you $100 seat fee or upwards. It really just depends on the property. And I think that's just like anything, if you decide you're going to go take a personal vacation and you want to stay at the Four Seasons as opposed to, I don't know, the West End.
4 points.
Right. There's just a different level of experience, and all of that will obviously translate into the seat fees and the costs associated with that facility. So just things to keep in mind. Jennifer, one of the other things that you mentioned when you were kind of talking about the contracting process was the food and beverage minimum. Can you kind of explain, because obviously there's the per person fee that, the caterers, if you're a South Asian couple, you would pay. Otherwise, if you're a westernized couple or American couple, let's say you're just paying for a menu cost. What is the food and beverage minimum, and why is that important for couples to pay attention to?
Correct. I get this question a lot. It's probably one of the number one questions that comes up once somebody is in the process of contracting their event. Mm-hmm. So there's two different things. So first is your actual cost per person for whatever menu package or catering menu that you're going to select from. So for instance, my property, if you would like to have your wedding with us, our packages are around $250 per person, plus. So that amount is what you will pay once you select your final menu, essentially, for your wedding package. The food and beverage minimum is just the amount that you're agreeing to pay the hotel in order for us to take that room out of inventory and hold it for you and block it for you for your wedding. So basically, our meeting space, ballroom space, any space in our property has a price tag to it. We've determined what we need to make in revenue in order to, keep the hotel open and running on a regular basis. So they've taken all of our space, divided it by the square footage, and we've come up with a price amount as to how much we need to make in that space in order to block it for a certain amount of time. So every space in any hotel or any venue has a value to it. So in the contract, you are committing to just spending that certain amount of money. It doesn't matter in my contract with how many guests you have or what package you choose, as long as you are committing to spending that amount. So let's say, for instance, you're booking one of my rooftop ballroom, the View Ballroom on the 15th floor. The minimum is $25,000. So whether you have 100 people and you spend $250 a head, or whether you have 160 people and maybe you spend a little bit less, it doesn't matter how many people or what package you choose, as long as you hit that $25,000 or more, then you fulfilled your obligation to the hotel. Now, some properties do it differently. Mm-hmm. Some will do it as a per person. Some will do it as, a package price. So every contract is a little bit different. Ever since we've had COVID, which really changed the landscape of how we word our contracts and how flexible we are, we did away with the per person or guaranteeing a certain amount of guests, because honestly, it's very difficult for a wedding couple to truly know how many guests are going to come to their wedding. You can guesstimate how many are going to come. You can do the 20% no-show factor as a possibility, but you may choose a destination that everybody wants to go to vacation to, like Disney World, and then you have 100% of your guests coming. So it's very difficult to determine what your guest count might be. So for me personally, I think just having the food and beverage minimum is better, because you're just committing to a certain amount that you're going to spend with the hotel, and it's up to you to have a little flexibility in deciding, do I want to have more people and do maybe a smaller menu, or do I want to invite less people and do a more extravagant menu? And that gives you that flexibility to be able to determine how you want to do it, as long as you give the hotel the amount that's contracted. So that's essentially what that amount is. It's just what you're committing by taking that space out of inventory a year, sometimes 2 years in advance. You're just committing to the hotel what money you will give them for that space.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you emphasizing what that point is. And for couples that are listening, a lot of times you're going to have no problem hitting your food and beverage minimum. They're not going to send you some astronomical number that would be impossible for you, or they shouldn't. They shouldn't.
If you think that might be a red flag.
That shouldn't, and if they do, absolutely, maybe consider if that.
It should be in line with the amount of guests that you're anticipating.
Yes.
Take the number that they give you, divide it by how many guests you're anticipating, and see what that per person number equates to. And if it's way out of line with what their wedding packages are, that's a question you need to ask. And that's where an experienced wedding planner, event planner comes into play, because they'll catch that typically and be like, whoa, wait a minute, when I divide this, it's like $500 a person. Your highest menu package is like $250. Like, that doesn't make sense. And that's where you can call the question and call them out on it. And that may be where you can negotiate a little.
Yeah, definitely. I so appreciate you mentioning that, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I've also seen it where it's a food and beverage minimum per event, as opposed to cumulative over the course of the weekend. And that's something that's important to also pay attention to, because, it can be harder to navigate those conversations, because some people may not be attending the front end functions, or you may be expecting lesser counts. And so those are things to think about as well.
Absolutely. And that's actually a good suggestion, to do it as a lump sum for the whole entire weekend versus per event. So if you are having multiple events, it may just make more sense to just say, let's just do an overall food and beverage minimum that you're committing to the hotel to spend, $100,000, versus piecemealing it per event, especially when you don't know truly what your final agenda might be. So that's a good strategy as well. And again, these are questions you can ask a hotel. A lot of times I will rewrite a contract. I will go back and I can change a clause in a contract. Again, it's just good to have that conversation. Most contracts are not set in stone, and you can negotiate. There are some negotiating, there's things that we can give in on, and there's things like the 26% that I can't give in on, but there's a lot of things that you can, ask questions about and negotiate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that kind of segues, or just a thought that I had was, obviously if you're booking a large function at a property, the likelihood that you're also going to need to, block rooms at that property is also very high. So, I feel like I could talk about room blocks forever, because there's so much, it's like a whole different episode is room blocking. But what would be some of your high level notes, Jennifer? Because I think the one thing is there's a misconception with sometimes couples that they say, I'm bringing 400 plus of my nearest and dearest to your property. I'm blocking 200 rooms. So if I'm halfway during the planning and I realize I need more inventory, you guys can just give it to me. Maybe you can just chat with what are some of the things to keep in mind when thinking about pairing your room block with your main venue contract.
Well, I will say for certain that if you are blocking guest rooms along with your meeting space, the chances of you getting your preferred date are very high, because that means the hotel is going to be making more money on that event, because you're bringing in more revenue to the hotel, not just in catering, but in rooms. And in a hotel, the perfect scenario would be a great sleeping rooms to space, meeting space ratio. Guests or couples that come in that want to take up all of the ballroom space but give no hotel rooms, it's very difficult for a hotel to give away all that space but still have hotel rooms left to sell. It has to be a good balance of two things, happening together. So typically, in order to get all of the meeting space, a good chunk of those guest rooms would already have to be sold in order to give all the space away, because otherwise the hotel's never going to give you all the meeting space without a good amount of the sleeping rooms being in ratio to it. So if you can actually come into a property saying, I'm going to book 50 guest rooms, or more, along with all this meeting space that I'm requesting, the chances of you getting an approval are going to be much higher, because that is revenue the hotel is looking at overall for your event, and that is taken into consideration for every booking. We look at a space to rooms ratio. We have an actual spreadsheet for our property that we plug numbers into to see how it spits out and if it's a good piece of business or not. And so for a wedding, we know that they typically need a little more space than a typical convention group, but having the guest room piece is huge. Negotiating rooms, gosh, this could be its own conversation and podcast in itself. Yes. But, one thing with a wedding, you should be getting a complimentary room on the night of your wedding. I just think that's a standard industry thing. And as a planner of over 20 years, I just think that's fair to the wedding couple to be able to stay in the property of where they're having their wedding, so they just have that ease of mind to be able to just at the end of the event go back to a room and go to sleep at the end of the event after their long day. So that should be something that you can ask for. That should be pretty standard at most hotel properties. Some will give more than 2 nights. Some will give some as a concession to parents of the bride, parents of the groom. They may give you like a hospitality room for guests to gather in. They may give you that getting ready room as a possibility. Just depends on how many sleeping rooms that particular venue has. Our property, we're very blessed. We have over 2,000 guest rooms, so I have a little more flexibility to be able to give things in my contracts, whereas a property that only has 189 rooms, may not have as much flexibility. But it's always important to ask the question, and if they can't give it to you complimentary, maybe they can give it to you as a concession at a really, really good price, or perhaps an upgrade. If you pay for a guest room, can they upgrade you to like a suite? Or can they give you the presidential if it happens to be available on the week of the wedding? So just, questions to ask along the way. Room blocks, typically you need 10 rooms or more in order to qualify for a discounted room block. Usually 10 rooms on one particular night. And then once you contract your bulk of your rooms for maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, cumulative, you will be committing in a contract to a certain amount of rooms, and you do have about a month or 2 in advance to have a little bit of a slippage. If you don't end up using up all the rooms, they do allow you to sometimes slip anywhere from 10%, 15%. Some hotels are generous, give you 20%. But if you don't fulfill all those rooms with guest rooms booking them, you're responsible for them, and then you have to pay for those rooms that don't fill up by your guests calling in. So just be very careful about how many rooms you're committing to. Look at the verbiage in the contract on what your liability is for signing off on all these guest rooms. I just had a wedding recently that over contracted too many rooms, and guess what? The entire wedding party, bridesmaids and groomsmen, each got their own individual guest room the night of the wedding, because they came in so short of their room block. The bride had to pay for 20 rooms and put up her whole wedding party, which was a wonderful gift for their wedding party, but I'm sure not so happy for their wedding budget, having to pay for an additional 20 rooms they weren't anticipating. So just be really careful about room blocks. Back in the day, people used to block 50, 100 rooms at a time. Now, I feel like couples are being a little bit more conservative with their room blocks. And at this day and age, there's so many different avenues for guests to stay, Airbnbs, VRBO. There's different ways that people go online and book their own rooms. They have different plans like Bonvoy program like Marriott and the Hilton Honors, and they're using their points and things. So, make sure you're having these conversations with guests before you commit to a room block to see how are they staying, where are they going to be staying, because you really want a more realistic number before you commit to spending that in the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that overview, because that's very helpful, I think, for anybody that's looking at that. And maybe I'll do like maybe a part 2 solo about room
Yes.
blocks, because there's a lot of information there.
There is.
You know, another thing to consider is obviously, you know, your vendors are going to need some rooms. You might want to kind of incorporate them. And then also, you know, if somebody is like a Marriott Bonvoy member, sometimes they can even get a better rate with their points. But if they book
Yes.
outside your block, that doesn't apply towards your block. So just things to kind of keep in mind, all the little nuances with that. But Jennifer, I want to pivot gears for a minute, and I want to chat just a little bit about your property, because I'd love to hear a little bit about. So for, you know, those who don't know, Jennifer, her main property that she works at is based in Orlando, Florida. So I'd love to hear just kind of a little bit about what's unique about your space. What is the capacities of that space? Do you allow outside catering? Maybe just kind of share a little bit with us about that.
Yes, well, thank you. Well, the Swan and Dolphin has been around for 30 years, and so we have a very tenured staff and a lot of experience doing conventions and conferences. And we used to do weddings, a good number of weddings, but it just honestly, with all the meetings and conventions going on, was not, you know, conducive for weddings, because we were always sharing the space with a meeting or a convention. And so our ownership team 2 years ago built a brand new property on what used to be our tennis courts for the hotel. So they did away with our 6 tennis courts, and our amazing construction and ownership team, Tishman Hotel Corporation, who do construction mostly in New York City, came in and built this amazing, beautiful structure on our 6 tennis court footprint across the street from the Swan and Dolphin. It's called the Swan Reserve. It is a modern, luxurious boutique property. It's part of the Autograph collection of Marriott, and it is gorgeous. And it is only 189 sleeping rooms. It is, I'm sorry, 189 suites, about 300 guest rooms. I apologize. And it is got this amazing, amazing venue at the 15th floor called the View Ballroom, and it overlooks Epcot and Magic Kingdom and Hollywood Studios. So in the evening, you have floor-to-ceiling windows around the ballroom and our outdoor terrace and foyer spaces that looks out onto Walt Disney World Resort. So we can see all of the fireworks. You can actually see all the way to International Drive, where the Orlando Eye is in the evenings. You can see it lit up. You can see Slinky Dog, Land of Batuu, Star Wars World in Hollywood Studios, the Tower of Terror. You can see the Epcot Spaceship Earth, the World Showcase around the lagoon in Epcot, and the nightly fireworks that are going up above the Magic Kingdom. It is spectacular and amazing. So this space, though, it's not a huge space. It is 4,000 square feet for the ballroom, about 2,000 square feet for the foyer, and about 1,500 for the terrace. But when you book it, it's like booking a penthouse. So once you get up to that 15th floor and your guests walk out, all of that space is yours, the entire rooftop. So, you know, combined, it's about 7,500 square feet in total. And we use it as flexible space to kind of start in one area like the foyer and the terrace, and then we proceed to go into the ballroom, which is about 4,000 square feet. It's perfect square. And then throughout the evening, guests come out, they go back out to the foyer, they go back out to the terrace to watch the fireworks, and it's a nice flow throughout the evening. So if somebody wants a little break from the noise or the DJ, they can go out to the foyer or terrace, and they can basically sit outside al fresco from the 15th floor and just listen to all the sounds and the sights of Walt Disney World happening around them. So it's really spectacular. We've even seen SpaceX launches because it does face the east. And so you get to see amazing launches and things. So it's a pretty unique, beautiful venue that I'm really proud to be back at the Swan and Dolphin to have opened and created all the processes and packages and you know, basically get it from construction to fruition of doing our amazing events that we're doing there today. So it's a great space. So for outside catering, it's got its own dedicated kitchen on the 15th floor. So for vendors loading in, they do have to use an elevator, but once they get up there, it is an entirely dedicated space. We don't share it with anybody. We have our own kitchen, walk-in cooler. So for outside catering, it actually is pretty ideal. So they can actually utilize our whole kitchen, and we don't have to share it with any conventions. It also has a first floor meeting space and there are 2 ballrooms on the first floor as well. And so again, for as far as having events there, you're pretty much the only event that's happening when you are booked in this particular property. So it's really nice. You get that feel like you own the whole hotel. So I love that piece. And then you still have all the restaurants, the pools, and all the different amenities of the Swan and Dolphin that you can walk right across the street and utilize. You also have our 30 years of experience of our tenured team. So literally the hotel opened on day 1. We had already all this experience of all these different cast members coming in to service our events. So we really went off without a hitch from day 1, because we didn't really have to train anybody. They just had to learn the new space and all of that amazing experience. And all of these wonderful cast members were already there when the doors opened. So it's pretty cool. Our banquet team services all 3 hotels. But there is a special dedicated team that had to get extra certification to service our weddings in the new venue, so that they have a little bit more of an elevated style of service for when they're in that particular ballroom versus our other convention meetings and spaces. So
yeah, that's
very
amazing.
proud of our property.
I love it. I think the view is fantastic. We had the pleasure of, supporting Party Slate when they were doing, whether their launch or what have you into Orlando. So obviously, Jennifer, we worked together on that. And so I got the first hand of like the flow and how it works. And the view is really spectacular. It's like nothing else. I mean, I have worked at a lot of properties, obviously, in Central Florida, and I've quite frankly not seen anything like it. So if you're really wanting an experience that Florida glass ceiling, windows, it really is a very special space. And it is unheard of that a venue is going to have your own sort of kitchen for you. Yes. So that never happens. So that's a really huge bonus, because I have a lot of clients who have been interested lately in doing different types of style cuisine, whether that be even some plated meals or like family style tables and things like that. And that does require a quick turnover with service from kitchen to table. And so having something like that, I think, is really, really huge. But Jennifer, I literally could keep you here forever and talk shop with you. But we always end each of our episodes saying, we're from the South, and we always say, you don't know what you don't know. Is there anything in particular, like parting words or advice that you would give to couples in particular that are on this like venue hunt journey and contracting process, just to kind of conclude for them?
I say go with whatever your heart is telling you and whatever takes your breath away. It's kind of like house hunters. When you walk into your home that you think is going to be your forever home, and it just takes your breath away, and you just know after looking at many different homes, and you just know this is the home you're going to buy, that is how you should feel when you walk into a venue. You should just feel it from head to toe. You should have goosebumps, and your heart should just fill with happiness when you're in a space. And you need to just feel like you're going to be at home, whether it's with the person you're working with, whether it's what you feel in that ballroom. Like, you got to listen to your heart, and then everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. So happy to be here, and happy for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you.